President Trump celebrating Jimmy Kimmel's suspension. His glee should come as no surprise to those who've actually heard him rail against late night for years. Listen.
The guy on CBS is what a lowlife. What a lowlife.
Fallon has no talent. Kimmel has no talent. They're next. They're going to be going. I hear they're going to be going.
Well, then there are the president's online posts. How bad is Seth Meyers? Jimmy Kimmel is next to go. Shortly thereafter, Fallon will be gone. The one-sided hatred on these shows is incredible. Colbert is very boring. CBS should terminate his contract. I could go on. I want to bring in Democratic strategist Chuck Rocha and CNN political commentator Brad Todd. Glad to have both of you here. I mean, the news came in fast and furious today on this issue, even while the president is overseas, even when there's other news coming in. This is a really big focus because it goes to the heart, really, of people's discussions on free speech. Brad, the FCC, they're supposed to be independent, but there's obviously this idea of what Brendan Carr had to say today, the White House's views on late night and between. Can the criticism and also statements from Brendan Carr today, does this give you pause about the independence and how the public will view it? Because ultimately their credibility makes them legitimate in the long term or not. Well,
their commissioners are appointed by the president, and they're Democrat commissioners or Republican commissioners are confirmed by the Senate. So it's a dependent agency in that format. I think one thing to remember here is Jimmy Kimmel has all the free speech he wants. He's going to go on Substack and say everything he can think of starting tomorrow. And that's his right. It's the public square. And TV news network using the broadcast airwaves is a little bit different because they operate under license from the FCC, and that license is dependent on their cooperation with the public interest obligation. And the Supreme Court has consistently said that the FCC has a right to interpret that and enforce it. So the FCC can decide if networks are acting in the public interest obligation or not.
But it would be counter to the First Amendment and Supreme Court longstanding precedent that you cannot engage in viewpoint discrimination. If you have a reasonable time, place, manner restriction that applies to everyone, regardless of your speech, then that's one thing. But the idea of saying, I don't like what you are saying, and therefore I'm going to make sure that my policies or my punishment is accordingly, that would run counter to the Supreme Court. And I want to read through a second before you answer, because the FCC chair back in 2022 said, this is his words, political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humor to draw more people into the discussion. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship. That strikes a chord. That's
sure.
The person.
Satire is very important. And of course, what happened tonight was you saw a business decision by station groups to just not carry it for a while as they assess things. And then you saw the ABC decide, well, maybe if our stations aren't going to carry it, maybe we should not carry it for a while. And I would also
make it sound so lovely. It sounds like saying, I'm not breaking up. We're on a break right now.
That's what they said.
The girl got dumped.
Now, but let's also go back and think about Joe Biden tried to come up with a thing called, remember the Disinformation Governance Board that he tried to set up? Jimmy Kimmel would be guilty of disinformation. He said that the shooter of Charlie Kirk was, in fact, a part of the president's movement, which is not true.
Well, those weren't his exact words. Actually, no, there was I know there was an intimation. That's the criticism.
It was clear that's what he meant.
Well, you said that's what he said. So there's a distinction there in terms of what he was suggesting and the idea of, and you can play his, matter of fact, let's just play his words. Why am I interpreting for Jimmy Kimmel? Do we have what he said? You decide for yourselves. Listen to this. We don't have it? Well, I'm not going to paraphrase. This is not my first rodeo. Chuck?
I was going to tell you about these station groups that Brad bring up. I don't think this is much about the First Amendment as part that bothers me the most. It's these station groups, and that this happened on Monday, and we're just talking about it today. Because these two they're not small, they own a ton of local ABC stations, wanting to do much more mergers. So that's in front of FCC. That is their job. They have to approve these mergers to make sure somebody don't have a monopoly. And that's how the system is set up, and it's a good system. But what happened today is you had the FCC commissioner go on a podcast and go, did y'all see what Crazy Kimmel said on Monday? I don't like that. We should do something about it. Signaling to these folks that I'm going to be the one approving this merger, and y'all need to get your boy right, or I'm not going to approve this. That's the part of this that bothers me.
Well, I have the clip.
Now we have the
clip. Here's what he said. Listen.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Now, hearing what he said, and obviously we can quibble with the specificity, but I want to tell you one thing that Don Jr. wrote in reaction, and I thought it was really interesting. I want you to hear your reaction, Brad. He said, they're not losing their jobs to cancel culture. They're losing them to consequence culture. Consequences and accountability are something Democrats haven't had to face in a long time. Is that the right take?
Well, I think what he's trying to get at there is we've had people at the head of large institutions and large media organizations and large cultural institutions in our country that were all pretty bent toward one ideological direction. That's changing some. The American public began pushing back. There was a populist uprising 10 years ago. It's continuing on to this day. That's bringing a lot more accountability to what Charles Murray, the sociologist, called super zips, right? People who live in these zip codes that are untouchable, and they run corporations, they run institutions, and they tend to all think the same way. That accountability has been coming, and I think this is part of it.